An app that loads fast is something you should try to achieve, no matter how large it is. Another aspect that is sometimes forgotten is the feeling of performance. Let's say we had an app that takes 1 second to load. That's a decent loading time. If we add spinners and loaders, that might give the impression the app is loading slowly. Even if the content loads at an acceptable rate, the perception is just as important as the actual speed itself. Apps need to feel smooth and fast. If you have your content popping in one place, one at a time, it can make it feel slow. That's what's called perceived performance. To illustrate this better, let's look at how the app we developed loads content. View a page for any song in your app. It doesn't matter which. Any will do. If we were to refresh the page, the content loads rather fast. There's not a lot of complex logic going on. Likewise, we're making minimal requests to the database. This is favorable because that means our app will load fast for most users. However, not everyone has high-end machines or high-speed internet. To get a better feel for how our app would perform on other machines, we can use the Chrome Developer Tools. Go ahead and open the Developer Tools. We're going to view the application in the Network panel to help us understand what's going on in our app. This panel will present us with an overview of the incoming and outgoing requests. Another feature of the Network panel is being able to throttle the network speed. This feature can help simulate the speed of slower internet connections. By default, throttling will be turned off. We can illustrate the problem by changing it to a slower speed. I'm going to use slow 3G. If I refresh the page, it'll take longer to load. Each time I refresh, the content popping into place becomes more noticeable. After the page loads, it takes a while for the name to appear. It would be better if the page could load in unison. Fortunately, we can change this behavior by modifying the code to use a different hook. Open the song component file in your editor. We're going to make modifications to the created lifecycle hook. As a refresher, the created lifecycle hook is called when the component has been created. We've made the function asynchronous, but Vue will not wait for the function to finish executing. It'll continue to load the content on the page. This means that the content will load before any asynchronous tasks are completed. This is why we see the component load, but without any content. It's because the data hasn't been retrieved yet. We want the component to load after we have the data in hand. To do that, we'll need to change the hook to a navigation guard. Change this from created to before route enter. The before route enter navigation guard will run before the component is loaded onto the page. One significant difference between this and the created lifecycle hook is that we can explicitly tell Vue when to move on to the next step. If we don't tell Vue that we're ready to move on, then nothing happens. This guard will give us the opportunity to perform any operation necessary for the component to display properly. You'll need to be aware of some issues, but I will discuss those in just a moment. First, let's accept the parameters to, from, and next. The first issue we'll face is that the this keyword isn't bound to the component. If we were to run the code as is, Vue would throw errors because we're trying to reference values that don't exist in the current scope. Keep in mind, navigation guards run before the component is loaded. We won't have access to the data, methods, and anything else injected into components. Luckily, there's an alternative way to get the data we need. Inside the guard, we're making a request to Firebase for the document. We're passing in the ID, which is accessed via the this.route object. Since we've switched to the guard, the route object isn't accessible. We'll need to replace this with the to object. The to object holds properties related to the current route being visited. This object includes the route parameters. We'll be able to provide the function with the information it needs. Afterward, we have more lines of code that uses the this keyword. This is where the real challenge starts. This part of the code needs the data property to be set and ready. That's not possible because the before route enter navigation guard is called before the component is created. Fortunately, we can get around this by using the next function. The next function can be used to provide context to our code. Let me show you what I mean. Right after making the request, call the next function. It's perfectly fine to do this because we don't need to run asynchronous tasks anymore. Even though we've given Vue permission to proceed, a lot of the code we have will execute almost instantly. This code won't work just yet. The next function has an optional parameter. We can pass in a callback function to run after the component has been loaded. We'll pass in an arrow function. The arrow function can have one parameter called VM. We'll add it in. At this point, the component has been loaded. We can access the component's data via the VM parameter. It's a context to the component. We can treat it like the this keyword. Therefore, we can move the code inside the function. We can replace the this keyword with the VM variable. This will produce an error with ESLint because we're attempting to assign a value to a property in the VM parameter. We're going to ignore this warning by adding the ignore comment above it. That'll do it. Save your changes. View the page again with throttling on. Things are different this time around. The speed at which the page loads will be the same. The changes were made to make the perceived performance faster. Unlike before, the content will load with the component. This is, of course, a case-by-case thing. Sometimes it's fine to load a page without some content. For example, we have comments on the page, but they're not as important as the main content itself. It's fine if they load after the component has been loaded. Most users will want to focus on the primary content before reading the comments. Of course, that's entirely up to you. That's just how I recommend you approach things.